The rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof of my Montana ranch house like it meant to tear the world apart. I stood at the window, watching the storm churn the fields into mud, my breath fogging the glass. Then I saw a alone figure staggering through the downpour, a shadow against the lightning's flash. My name's Caleb Holt, 32, and I've lived alone on this sprawling 200-acre ranch since Dad passed 5 years ago. The solitude suits me, or so I thought, until that night in late August when the storm brought a stranger to my door. I grabbed my coat, the wind tearing at me as I stepped onto the porch. The man was closer now, his steps uneven, one arm clutching his side like he was holding himself together. "Hey," I shouted, voice barely cutting through the gale. "You okay out there?" He lifted his head, rain streaming down his face, and I caught a glimpse of dark eyes, sharp and searching, even through the haze of the storm. He was about my age, maybe a touch younger, with a lean build and a jacket that looked too thin for this kind of weather. "To need help?" he called back, his voice rough but steady, like he was fighting to keep it together. Something in it hit me hard, like a rope snapping taut. I didn't think twice. "Get in here." I waved him toward the porch, holding the door open as he stumbled up the steps. Up close, he was soaked to the bone, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his lips faintly blue from the cold. He carried a backpack, slung over one shoulder, and his left hand pressed against his ribs, a faint wince crossing his face as he moved. "You hurt?" I asked, guiding him inside. "Just bruised," he said, but the way he avoided my eyes told me there was more to it. "Got caught in the storm. Car broke down a mile back. I saw your lights." His voice was low, with a faint city edge. "Chicago. Maybe. Or somewhere east. He didn't belong out here in the middle of nowhere. That much was clear." "Sit," I said, pointing to the couch by the fireplace. The house was warm, the fire crackling, but the air felt charged, like the storm had followed him inside. I tossed him a blanket, and he caught it with a nod, wrapping it around his shoulders. "I'm Caleb," I said, keeping my tone even. "You got a name?" "Eli," he replied, his eyes flicking up to meet mine. "Eli Navarro." There was a pause, like he was weighing whether to say more. But he didn't. Instead, he glanced around the roomy Dad's old hunting rifle on the wall, the worn leather armchair, the photos of a life I'd half forgotten. His gaze lingered on a picture of me and Dad, taken when I was 16, both of us grinning after a long day branding cattle. "You live out here alone?" Eli asked, his voice softer now, almost cautious. "Yeah," I said, busying myself with the fire to avoid his stare. "Just me and the horses." I didn't mention how the quiet had started to feel like a weight, how the ranch that once felt like freedom now sometimes felt like a cage. "You're lucky you found this place. Storm like this could kill a man." Eli's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "Guess I owe you one. Then." I shrugged, grabbing a kettle to make coffee. "Don't owe me anything. Just don't bleed out on my couch." That got a real laugh out of him. Short and rough, but it warmed the room more than the fire did. As the coffee brewed, I studied him. His hands were calloused, but not from ranch work, maybe construction, or something mechanical. His jacket had a patch torn off, and his boots were scuffed but expensive, like he'd come from somewhere with money but fallen on hard times. There was a story behind those eyes, one he wasn't ready to tell, and maybe I wasn't ready to hear it. "You got family to call?" I asked, handing him a mug. He took it, his fingers brushing mine for a split second, and I felt a jolt, like static. I pulled back, blaming the storm for the way my pulse kicked up. "No family," he said, staring into the mug. "Not anymore." The words hung heavy, and I didn't push. I knew what it was like to carry loss you couldn't put down. We sat in silence for a while, the storm raging outside, the fire casting shadows across his face. He sipped the coffee, wincing slightly as he shifted, and I noticed the way his hand kept drifting to his side. "You sure you're just bruised?" I asked, leaning forward. He hesitated, then lifted his shirt just enough to show a deep purple mark blooming across his ribs. "Got jumped a few towns back," he admitted, his voice tight. "Didn't see it coming." "Jesus," I muttered, standing. "You need a doctor." "It's fine," he said quickly, pulling the shirt back down. "Just need to rest. I'll be out of your hair by morning." I didn't like it, but I didn't argue. "You're not going anywhere in this storm," I said, grabbing a first aid kit from the kitchen. "At least let me clean you up." He watched me warily as I knelt beside him, but he didn't stop me when I handed him a damp cloth and some antiseptic. Our hands brushed again, and this time, he didn't pull away. Neither did I. As I bandaged a cut on his knuckles small, but Deepy caught him staring at me, his eyes softer now, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, meeting his gaze, "but I'm doing it anyway." The storm held on, but in that moment, the room felt still. I didn't know who Eli Navarro was, or what he was running from, but I knew one thing. He wasn't leaving this ranch the same way he came. And maybe, just maybe, neither was I. The storm didn't let up until dawn, and by then, Eli was asleep on the couch, his breathing steady but shallow, the blanket tucked around him like a shield. I hadn't slept. Not really, just dozed in the armchair, keeping one eye on him, half expecting him to vanish into the night. Something about him felt like a ghost, like he could slip away if I blinked too long. Morning broke with a pale, watery light filtering through the windows. The ranch was a mess, fences down, mud everywhere, the horses restless in the barn. I stepped outside to check the damage, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and pine. When I came back, Eli was awake, standing at the kitchen counter, trying to make coffee with one hand while holding his side with the other. "You don't have to play host," I said, crossing my arms. "You're hurt." He shot me a look, half smirk, half defiance. "I'm not helpless, Caleb. I've had worse." His tone was light, but his eyes betrayed him there was pain there, and not just from the bruises. I didn't press. Instead, I took over the coffee, pouring him a fresh mug. "You planning to tell me what happened?" I asked, keeping my voice casual as I handed it to him. "Who jumps a guy in the middle of nowhere?" Eli's fingers tightened around the mug, and for a moment, I thought he'd shut me down. Then he sighed, leaning against the counter. "Wrong place. Wrong time," he said. "I was hitchhiking out of Billings. Got picked up by some guys who didn't like the look of me. Things got ugly." "Didn't like the look of you?" I raised an eyebrow, taking in his city boots and the faint trace of eyeliner smudged under his eyes. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. A quiet rebellion against the kind of men who'd jump a stranger for sport. I knew those types, grew up around them. Fought them in high school when they called me names I didn't yet understand. Eli caught my stare and held it, like he was daring me to say something. "Yeah," he said finally. "Guess I don't blend in out here." "You don't have to," I said, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. "Not on my land." He blinked, then looked away, his jaw tight. "Thanks," he muttered, and I could tell it cost him to say it. Pride was a heavy thing to carry when you were battered and lost. I spent the morning fixing the fences, and Eli insisted on helping, despite my protests. He was stubborn. I'd give him that. hauling posts with a grimace but never complaining. By noon, we were both covered in mud, and the sun was high, burning off the last of the storm's chill. "You don't quit, do you?" I said, wiping sweat from my brow as we leaned against the barn. "Never learned how," he replied, his smile faint but real. It was the first time I'd seen it without the weight of caution, and it hit me like a punch bright. Unguarded. Dangerous. We ate lunch on the porch. Sandwiches and cold beer. The silence between us comfortable now. Like we'd known each other longer than a day. He told me bits and pieces. Born in Chicago. Left home at 18. Bounced around odd jobs. Never stayed anywhere long. Always moving, he said, staring out at the fields. Never found a reason to stop. "What about now?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might answer. But then he stood, brushing crumbs off his jeans. "You got any more work needs doing?" I let it go. We spent the afternoon in the barn, checking the horses. Eli had a way with them, gentle but firm, like he'd done it before. "You're not half bad at this," I said, watching him brush down my mare. "Daisy. Worked a stable one summer," he said. "Horses don't judge you. People do." The words hung there, heavy with truth. I wanted to ask more, to dig into the scars he wasn't showing. But I didn't. Instead, I handed him a pitchfork. "You want to stick around? You're earning your keep." He laughed, and damn if it didn't light up the whole barn. By evening, the ranch felt different. Like Eli's presence had shifted something I couldn't name. We sat by the fire again, sharing a bottle of whiskey I kept for rough nights. He told me about a jazz club he loved in Chicago, the way the music felt like it could fix a broken heart. I told him about Dad, how he taught me to ride before I could walk, how losing him felt like losing the ground under my feet. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Eli asked, his voice soft, the whiskey loosening his edges. "Every day," I admitted. "But it's home. Only thing I've got left." He nodded, like he understood more than he was saying. "Home's a hard thing to find," he said, and his hand brushed mine again, this time lingering just long enough to make my heart stumble. I pulled back, standing to poke at the fire. "You can stay a few days," I said, my voice gruff, "till you're healed up." Eli didn't answer right away, but when he did, his voice was low, steady. "I don't want to be a burden, Caleb." "You're not," I said, and I meant it. That night, I lay awake in my room, listening to the creak of the house and the faint sound of Eli shifting on the couch downstairs. I didn't know what was happening, didn't want to name the pull I felt toward him. All I knew was that for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel so empty. The next few days blurred into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Eli stayed, despite his talk of moving on, and I didn't push him to leave. The ranch demanded work, fences to mend, horses to feed, a leaking roof to patch, and Eli threw himself into it, his injuries slowing him but not stopping him. He was stubborn as hell, and I liked it more than I should have. Mornings started early. The Montana sky streaked with pink as we hauled hay or cleaned stalls. Eli had a quiet strength, not showy but steady, like he'd carried heavier things than fence posts in his life. We talked while we worked. Small things at first. Favorite foods. He loved spicy tacos. I was a steak and potatoes guy. The best way to calm a spooked horse. The way the stars looked clearer out here than anywhere else. But the conversations grew deeper, like a river carving out a canyon. One afternoon, as we sat on the tailgate of my truck, sharing a thermos of coffee, he told me about his brother, Mateo, who died when Eli was 20. Car accident, he said, his voice flat, but his eyes distant. He was the only one who got me. After he was gone, home didn't feel like home anymore. I nodded, thinking of Dad's heart attack, the way it ripped the world out from under me. I know that feeling, I said, like you're stuck in a place that doesn't fit you anymore. Eli looked at me, his gaze sharp, like he saw right through the walls I'd built. So why stay? He asked. I didn't have an answer. Not a good one. Duty. Maybe. I said finally. This ranch was Dad's dream. Feels like betraying him if I walk away. Eli shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Sounds like you're carrying his ghost instead of living your life. The words stung, but they weren't wrong. I changed the subject, pointing out a hawk circling overhead. But his words stuck with me, needling at something I'd buried deep. That night, we cooked dinner together, nothing fancy. Just chili and cornbread. But it felt like more. Eli chopped onions with a precision that made me laugh, teasing him about being a city boy with knife skills. He shot back, calling me a cowboy cliché. And for a moment, the kitchen was alive with something warm. Something alive. Our shoulders brushed as we moved around the cramped space. And I didn't pull away. Neither did he. After dinner, we sat on the porch, the air cool and crisp, the stars blazing above us. Eli leaned back, his hands behind his head, and I caught myself staring at the line of his jaw, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. I looked away, my heart pounding, and busied myself with my beer. You ever been in love? He asked out of nowhere, his voice soft but piercing. I froze, the bottle halfway to my lips. Once, I said, my voice rough. High school. Didn't end well. I didn't tell him about Ryan, the boy I'd kissed behind the bleachers, the one who left town after his dad caught us. I didn't tell him how I'd spent years convincing myself I didn't need anyone, that the ranch was enough. Eli nodded, like he heard the things I didn't say. I was engaged, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His name was David. We were together 3 years. Thought we'd have forever. What happened? I asked, my chest tight. He couldn't handle it, Eli said, his eyes fixed on the stars. The looks, the whispers, the fights with his family. He left me a note and walked out. That was 2 years ago. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached out, my hand resting on his shoulder, a clumsy attempt at comfort. He didn't pull away, just leaned into it. And for a moment, the world was just us, the night, and the weight of what we'd both lost. The next day, trouble came knocking. I was in the barn when I heard tires crunching on the gravel drive. A black truck pulled up. 2 men inside, their faces hard and unfamiliar. I stepped outside, Eli at my side, and felt the air shift, like the storm had never really left. Caleb Holt, the driver called, stepping out. He was broad, with a buzz cut and a sneer that set my teeth on edge. Who's asking? I said, keeping my voice steady. Name's Travis, he said, his eyes flicking to Eli. We're looking for him. Eli stiffened, his hand brushing mine. A silent warning. I don't know you, he said, his voice cold. Travis laughed, a sound like gravel underfoot. Don't play dumb, Navarro. You owe some people, and they don't like waiting. My blood ran cold. I didn't know Eli's story, not all of it, but I knew enough to see he was running from something bigger than a bad breakup. And now it was standing in my driveway, looking for a fight. Get off my land, I said, stepping forward, my fists clenched. Travis smirked, but his friend stayed quiet, his eyes scanning the ranch like he was sizing it up. We'll be back, Travis said, climbing back into the truck. You can't hide forever. Eli. As they drove off, Eli's face was pale, his jaw tight. I need to go, he said, turning toward the house. You're not going anywhere, I said, grabbing his arm. Not until you tell me what the hell's going on. He looked at me, his eyes raw, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not of me, but of whatever he was carrying. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't letting him face it alone. Eli didn't want to talk, but I wasn't giving him a choice. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd laughed over chili the night before. But now the air was thick with tension. His hands were clasped tight, knuckles white, like he was holding onto something that might slip away. Start talking, I said, leaning back in my chair, arms crossed. Who were those guys? And why are they after you? Eli stared at the table, his jaw working like he was chewing on the words. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I got mixed up with some bad people in Chicago, he said, his voice low. I was working as a mechanic, fixing cars for a shop that turned out to be a front. They were moving stolen goods cars, parts, you name it. I didn't know at first, but once I figured it out, I wanted out. And they didn't let you go, I said, piecing it together. He nodded. I took something to ledger, proof of what they were doing. Thought I could use it to keep them off my back. Instead, it made me a target. I've been running ever since. I leaned forward, my mind racing. You still have it. The ledger. It's in my bag, he said, glancing toward the living room where his backpack sat. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I kept moving, they'd give up. They don't sound like the giving up type, I said, thinking of Travis's sneer. The way his friend had eyed the ranch like it was something to take. You should have told me, Eli. I didn't want to drag you into this, he said, his voice breaking. You've already done too much. I stood, pacing the kitchen, trying to keep my anger in check. Not at him, but at the situation, at the idea of someone hunting him like an animal. You're not dragging me into anything, I said. They came to my home. This is my fight now, too. Eli looked up, his eyes wide, like he couldn't believe I'd say that. Caleb, you don't know what these people are capable of. Then tell me, I said, stopping in front of him. All of it. He did. Over the next hour, he laid it out the shop in Chicago. The late-night deals. The men who'd beat him bloody when he tried to walk away. The ledger was his insurance. But it was also a death sentence. He'd been running for months. Hitchhiking. Staying off the grid. Always looking over his shoulder. The bruises on his ribs weren't from Billings. They were from a week ago, when he'd barely escaped another run-in. When he finished, I sat back, my head spinning. We need to go to the sheriff, I said. Eli shook his head. They've got people everywhere. Cops, too. I don't know who to trust. You trust me? I asked, my voice quieter now. He met my eyes, and something passed between us, raw and unspoken. Yeah, he said. I do. Then we figure this out together, I said. But you're not running. Not anymore. The rest of the day was tense. I kept an eye on the road, half expecting Travis and his buddy to come back. Eli stayed close, helping with chores but always glancing at the horizon, like he could feel the noose tightening. I showed him how to load Dad's rifle, just in case, and the weight of it in his hands seemed to steady him. That night, we sat by the fire again, but the whiskey stayed in the bottle. You don't have to do this, Eli said, his voice soft. You could turn me out. No one would blame you. I would, I said, meeting his gaze. I'm not letting you go. The words hung there, heavier than I meant them to be. Eli's eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought he might reach for me. Instead, he stood, moving to the window, staring out at the dark. "You're a good man, Caleb," he said. "Better than I deserve." I wanted to argue, to tell him he deserved more than he thought. But the words stuck. Instead, I stood beside him, our shoulders close, the silence saying what I couldn't. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a truck engine. Not mine. I grabbed the rifle and stepped onto the porch. Eli right behind me. It was Travis again. But this time, he wasn't alone. 2 more trucks. 4 men total. All of them looking like they meant business. "Caleb Holt," Travis called, stepping out. "We just want Navarro. Hand him over. And we're gone." Eli's hand brushed mine, a silent plea to stay calm. But I was done being calm. "I told you to get off my land," I said, raising the rifle. "I won't say it again." Travis laughed, but it was forced, his eyes flicking to the barrel. "You're making a mistake, cowboy." "Maybe," I said, "but it's mine to make." The standoff lasted seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, Travis backed off, his men piling into the trucks. "This ain't over," he said, pointing at Eli. "You can't hide forever." As they drove off, Eli grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Caleb, you can't fight them all." "Watch me," I said, my voice steady. But inside, I was scared not for me, but for him, for what we were starting to mean to each other. That night, we made a plan. The ledger was our leverage, but we needed to get it to someone we could trust. Eli knew a journalist in Seattle, someone who'd worked on stories like this before. It was a long shot, but it was something. As we sat by the fire, mapping out the next steps, Eli's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through my own. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I squeezed his hand, my heart pounding. "We're in this together," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. The next few days were a tightrope walk. Every creak of the house, every shadow in the fields, had me reaching for the rifle. Eli was jumpy, too, but he hit it well, throwing himself into the ranch work like it was his salvation. We didn't talk about the men in the trucks, but their threat hung over us, a storm cloud that wouldn't break. I called a friend, Jake, who'd been Dad's buddy and a deputy sheriff back in the day. He was retired now, living 20 miles out, but I trusted him. Over coffee at his place, I told him enough to get his help without spilling Eli's secrets. "You're in deep, Caleb," Jake said, his eyes sharp. "You sure about this guy?" "I'm sure," I said, and the certainty in my voice surprised me. Jake didn't ask more, just promised to keep an eye out and put out feelers for anyone sniffing around my ranch. Back home, Eli and I worked on the plan. The ledger was a small notebook, filled with names, dates, and deals enough to bring down the operation in Chicago if it got to the right hands. We decided to mail it to Eli's journalist friend, but we needed to be smart about it. No postmarks, no traces. I drove to a town 50 miles away, dropped it in a random mailbox, and prayed it'd reach Seattle. Each night, we grew closer, the tension between us shifting from fear to something else. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Eli's head tipped against my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. "I've never felt safe like this," he said, his voice soft. "Not since Mateo." I turned, our faces inches apart, and my heart stuttered. "You're safe here," I said, and I meant it, even if I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. He kissed me then, sudden and fierce. his hands gripping my shirt like he was afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. I kissed him back. All the fear and one I'd buried pouring out. The world narrowing to the taste of him. The heat of his skin. When we broke apart, his eyes were bright, like he'd found something he thought he'd lost. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean." "Don't," I said, cupping his face. "Don't be sorry." We didn't talk after that, just held each other. The stars above us and the ranch quiet around us. For the first time in years, I felt alive, like the walls I'd built were crumbling, and I wasn't afraid of what was on the other side. But trouble doesn't wait for love to bloom. A week after the mailbox drop, I woke to the sound of glass shattering. I grabbed the rifle, heart pounding, and found Eli already up, his eyes wide. "They're here," he whispered. We moved to the living room, crouching low. Headlights cut through the windows, and I heard voices. "Travis." And others. "Come out, Navarro," Travis shouted. "We know you're in there." I glanced at Eli, his face pale but set. "Stay here," I said, moving toward the door. "No way," he said, grabbing my arm. "We do this together." I nodded, and we stepped onto the porch, the rifle steady in my hands. 3 men stood in the yard, Travis in front, his smirk gone. "Last chance. Holt," he said. "Give him up, or we burn this place down." "You're not touching him," I said, my voice cold. "Or my ranch." Travis laughed, but before he could move, headlights flashed behind him. Jake's truck roared up, 2 of his old deputy buddies with him. "Step back, Travis," Jake called, his shotgun raised. "You're done here." The men hesitated, then scattered, their trucks peeling out into the night. Jake clapped my shoulder. "You okay, kid?" "Yeah," I said, my eyes on Eli. "We're okay." But we weren't out of the woods. The next day, Eli got a call from his journalist friend. The Ledger had arrived, and she was working on the story, but it'd take time. Until then, Eli was still a target. We decided he'd stay, lay low, and I'd keep the rifle close. That night, as we lay in bed because that's where we'd ended up, tangled together like we could keep the world out, Eli traced the scar on my knuckles, a relic from a bar fight years ago. "I don't deserve you," he said, his voice thick. "Stop that," I said, kissing his forehead. "You're here. That's enough." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Not until he was free. And I'd do whatever it took to make that happen. The days that followed were a strange mix of peace and dread. The ranch felt like a sanctuary, with Eli's laughter filling the spaces that had been empty too long. But the threat of Travis and his crew loomed like a shadow. We kept busy, repairing the barn, tending the horses, and stealing moments kisses in the hayloft. Quiet talks under the stars. Each one felt like a gift, but also a countdown. Eli opened up more, sharing stories of his life before Chicago summers with his brother, sneaking into clubs, the first time he realized he was gay and the fear that came with it. I told him about Ryan, how we'd been kids fumbling through something we didn't understand, how his leaving broke something in me I thought I'd never fix. "You fixed it," Eli said one night, his hand on my chest, and I wanted to believe him. Jake checked in daily, his contacts in the sheriff's office keeping tabs on Travis. Word was, the Ledger had stirred things up in Chicago. Eli's journalist friend, Mia, was digging deep, and rumors of arrests were starting to spread. But until the story broke, we were in limbo. One morning, as we mucked out the stalls, Eli stopped, leaning on his pitchfork. "Caleb, if this goes south, I want you to know." "Don't." I cut him off. my voice sharper than I meant. We're not doing goodbyes. He smiled, but it was sad. I just need you to know you've given me something I thought I'd never have again. A reason to stay. I dropped my shovel, crossing the barn to pull him into my arms. You're not going anywhere, I said, my voice rough. Not without me. That night, we made love slowly, like we were memorizing each other. The fear and hope tangled together. Afterward, Eli curled against me, his breath steady, and I lay awake, wondering how I'd gone from a man who needed no one to someone who couldn't imagine life without him. The call came 2 days later. Mia's voice crackled through Eli's burner phone. Her words rushed. The story's out, she said. Front page. They're rounding up the ring in Chicago. You're clear, Eli. I watched his face as he listened, saw the weight lift, then crash back down. What's wrong? I asked when he hung up. They got most of them, he said, his voice tight. But Travis and a few others slipped the net. Mia says they're looking for me. My stomach twisted. Then we stay sharp, I said. We've got Jake, the rifle, and this ranch. They're not getting to you. Eli nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was already bracing for the next hit. I hated seeing him like that. Hated the way fear dimmed the light I'd come to love. We doubled down on precautions-locked gates, motion lights, Jake's buddies patrolling at night. But life on the ranch didn't stop. We rode out to check the herd, Eli handling the reins like he was born to it. And for a few hours, it felt like we could outrun the danger. He laughed as we galloped across the fields, the wind in his hair. And I thought, this is what I want. Forever. But forever's a fragile thing. That night, as we sat on the porch, a shot rang out. The horses screamed, and Eli grabbed my arm, pulling me down. Get inside, I yelled, scrambling for the rifle. The yard was dark, but I saw movement, 2 figures near the barn. Travis's voice cut through the night. You thought you could ruin us. Navarro, you're done. I fired a warning shot into the air, my heart pounding. Get off my land, I shouted, but my voice shook. Eli was beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder, and I drew strength from it. Jake's truck roared up, his lights pinning the figures. Drop it, he bellowed, and I saw the glint of a gun in Travis's hand. His partner bolted, but Travis stood his ground, his face twisted with rage. You're a dead man, Navarro, he screamed, raising the gun. I didn't think. I tackled Eli to the ground as the shot went wide, splintering the porch rail. Jake fired back, and Travis dropped, clutching his leg. His gun skidded across the dirt, and Jake was on him in seconds, cuffing him as his buddies rounded up the other man. When it was over, I pulled Eli close, my hand shaking. You okay? I whispered. He nodded, his face pale but his eyes fierce. Because of you, he said, and kissed me, right there in the chaos, like it was the only thing that mattered. Travis was gone, hauled off by Jake's friends to face charges. But the ranch didn't feel safe yet. The bullet hole in the porch rail was a reminder of how close we'd come, and Eli's eyes carried a new weight, like he was waiting for the next blow. I wanted to fix it, to make him feel the safety he'd given me in those quiet moments. But I didn't know how. We spent the next day cleaning up, boarding the broken window, calming the horses. Eli was quiet, his movements mechanical, and I caught him staring at the road more than once. You're thinking about running, I said, catching him alone in the barn. He didn't deny it. I've brought you nothing but trouble, Caleb, he said, his voice low. You almost got shot because of me. And you think I'd be better off without you. I stepped closer, my hands on his shoulders. You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. Don't you dare take that away. He looked at me, his eyes wet, and for a moment, I thought he'd argue. Instead, he pulled me into a hug, his face buried in my neck. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. How to stay? Then we'll figure it out, I said, holding him tighter. Together. The next week was a blur of statements to the sheriff, calls with Mia, and news reports about the Chicago ring crumbling. Eli's name stayed out of it. Thank God. But the fear lingered. We kept the rifle loaded, the gates locked. But slowly, the ranch started to feel like ours again. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Eli pulled out a sketchbook I hadn't seen before. I used to draw, he said, flipping through pages of cityscapes. Faces. Horses. Stopped after David left. Felt like I didn't have anything worth drawing. I looked at the sketches, each one alive with feeling. These are incredible, I said. Why'd you hide this? He shrugged, a shy smile breaking through. Didn't think it mattered. It matters, I said, taking his hand. You matter. That night, he drew me a rough sketch. My hat low, my eyes soft as I looked at him. When he showed me, I laughed, embarrassed but touched. You make me look better than I am, I said. No, he said, his voice steady. I draw what I see. The days turned into weeks, and the threat faded, replaced by a new rhythm. Eli took over the vegetable garden, planting seeds with a care that made my heart ache. I taught him how to mend a saddle, and he taught me how to cook tacos that burned my tongue but made me grin. We were building something, not just a life but a home. One morning, as we rode out to check the fences, Eli stopped his horse, looking out at the mountains. I think I could stay here, he said, his voice quiet but sure. With you. I reached for his hand, our horses side by side. I was hoping you'd say that, I said, my throat tight. That night, we talked about the future, something we'd avoided until now. Eli wanted to start a small repair shop on the ranch, fixing up old cars, maybe teaching kids from town. I thought about expanding the herd, maybe opening the ranch to visitors, sharing this place that had shaped me. It felt possible, with him. But life doesn't let you dream too long without testing you. A letter came from Mia, forwarded from Chicago. One of Travis's crew was out on bail, and word was he'd been asking about Eli. The news hit like a punch. But this time, Eli didn't talk about running. We face it, he said, his hand in mine. No more hiding. I nodded, pulling him close. No more hiding, I echoed, and meant it for him. For me. For us. We spent the next day preparing, not just for trouble, but for the life we wanted. Eli sketched plans for the shop, and I called Jake, setting up a meeting with the sheriff to make sure we were covered. The ranch was ours, and we'd fight for it. As the sun set, we stood on the porch, Eli's arm around my waist. I love you, he said, the words simple but heavy, like they'd been waiting to be said. I love you, too, I said, and kissed him, the world falling away until it was just us, the ranch, and the promise of tomorrow. Winter came early to Montana, dusting the ranch in snow that softened the edges of the world. Eli and I had settled into a life that felt like a miracle, each day a step toward something permanent. The threat of Travis's crew lingered, but with Jake's help and the sheriff on our side, we were ready. The ranch was our fortress, and love was our shield. Eli's shop took shape in the old shed, tools lining the walls, a sign reading Navarro's Repairs above the door. He'd started fixing up a neighbor's tractor, and word spread fast. Kids from town came by, eager to learn, their laughter echoing across the fields. I expanded the herd, bought a few more horses, and started planning a guest cabin for visitors. The ranch was alive again. Not just Dad's dream, but ours. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Eli showed me a new sketch portrait of us, standing together in the fields, the mountains behind us. "This is home," he said, his voice soft. "You gave me that." I took the sketch, my eyes stinging. "You gave me more," I said. "You gave me a reason to live, not just survive." We kissed, slow and deep, the fire crackling beside us. Outside, the snow fell, blanketing the ranch in quiet. But inside, our world was warm, full of promise. The last of Travis's crew was caught a month later, picked up in Idaho on unrelated charges. Mia's story had done its work, dismantling the Chicago ring for good. Eli was free, truly free, and the relief in his eyes was a gift I'd never forget. We faced the town together, holding hands at the market, ignoring the stares. Some folks whispered, others smiled, and a few, like Jake, clapped us on the back, saying, "About time you found someone." Holt. I'd spent years hiding who I was. But with Eli, I wasn't afraid anymore. One spring morning, as the fields bloomed green, Eli proposed, not with a ring, but with a sketcher ring of braided leather, drawn with such care it took my breath away. "Marry me, Caleb," he said, his voice steady. "Let's build this life for good." I said yes, laughing through tears, and we kissed in the sunlight, the horses grazing nearby, the ranch alive with possibility. Our wedding was small, just Jake, Mia, and a few neighbors, held in the barn with fairy lights and wildflowers. Eli wore a white shirt, his eyes bright as he said his vows, promising to stay, to fight, to love me through every storm. I promised the same, my voice breaking as I slid a real leather ring onto his finger, one I'd made myself. As we danced under the stars, the music soft and the night warm, I thought about the storm that brought him here. It had torn through my life, upending everything I thought I knew. But it gave me something better, Eli. Love. A future I'd never dared to dream. The ranch was ours now, not just mine. And as we stood together, watching the sun rise the next morning, I knew we'd face whatever came, side by side. Love wasn't just a gift. It was a promise, one we'd keep for the rest of our lives.